Hi class. So the last part of section 2.4 is talking about zonation. So we're looking at zonation. What we're talking about is this change in the communities as we move across a gradient. So for example, if we look at an intertidal zone, so we can look at the subtidal zone, that intertidal zone in between the low and the high tide, and that splash zone. So that's what we did in class. But another common example is looking at a large mountain and just looking at how the communities change just across that gradient as we go from the bottom part of the mountain to the very, very peak of the mountain. And it's due to a lot of differences in the abiotic factors in those different zones. So when we looked at the intertidal zone, a lot of the change was due to the abiotic factors like dependency on water. So how much water do the organisms need? Do they need to be continuously in water? Could they spend most of their time outside of the water? And that determined, where they could survive and that ecological niche, so that position that they will take within the environment, taking into account the resources that they use and their, adaptations, like where can they possibly survive? So, like we said, there's a lot of different factors that can bring about this zonation. So temperature is very common. If you've ever hiked a very, very, very tall mountain, you would know that at the bottom it could be quite warm. So we talked about this in class. So you could be in this tropical zone, maybe in South America, at the bottom of the mountain where it's quite warm and humid. And then as you're hiking up, slowly, the side of the mountain, you could reach a place where it's really cold, it's even freezing, so there's still ice and snow at the top. So we can see that temperature plays a big part in it, as well as precipitation and other water elements if we're looking at the intertidal zone. Solar insolation, so the amount of sunlight we receive. The soil type, so soil types do tend to vary if we're looking at the bottom of a mountain versus the top of the mountain as well. Species interactions. So this would be talking about that, interspecific competition between the organisms, which might keep some of the organisms in one zone while some of the other organisms need to live in a slightly different zone. And then human activities obviously can change the zonation or where different organisms will be living. So on the bottom here, we're looking at these different zones. You'll find this to be rather common. So we're making a comparison between this, the altitude of the mountain, okay, and the type of biome that we might see there. So we could liken these or compare these to the biomes. So our temperate deciduous forest or tropical forest. This is our needle leaf forest. So this is our coniferous forest, like our boreal forest. Then we have tundra, and then we just have ice and snow, okay, so solid pack. Then this is similar to what we saw in our class activity, so looking at our low tide zone, our intertidal zone, our splash zone. I don't totally agree with this diagram actually, because really, our intertidal zone should be between our low tide and our high tide. So, but let's just ignore maybe this part and we'll look at the organisms on the side. So we see this separation here in the organisms that can survive in these different areas. And this is the idea that we're looking at. And if you think about striation, so striation is just like stripes, right? So we'll see these horizontal stripes with different organisms in different zones. Again, a similar example. So now we're looking at the mountain and we can see that same type of striation or striping as we go from the bottom of the mountain up toward the top of the mountain. So this is what we'd expect, okay? So as we're moving from the bottom toward the top, we have a colder environment. We're going to have less developed soils toward the top, and that impacts the things that can survive there. So generally speaking, our bigger trees will exist toward the bottom of the mountain if you're talking about a very tall mountain. And then toward the top, we're just going to have smaller organisms. So looking more similar, so resembling more closely something like the tundra. And we're getting here, and this says moss and lichens. So really, if you think about it, we can also make a comparison between this and the succession. So it seems like we're at the very beginning here when we look at succession. So this would be our barren rock, right? No soil established. And I'm kind of going through that process of getting those pioneer plants like the mosses and lichens in there. And then slowly, slowly we have this development of these other communities as well. So at the bottom, we'd expect to see fairly rich, deeper soils. And we can, just make those clear comparisons between succession and the zonation and the biomes as well. I'm going to go back super quick because I think this is my last one. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go back here. Again, as a reminder, when we're looking at the intertidal zonation, really, the lower the organisms are, that means that they're more dependent on having water continuously. So if they're below that low tide mark, that means that they're always going to be covered in water. If they're between that low tide mark, so this is low tide zone. I'm not sure if they mean like this is supposed to be the low tide mark, so the average low tide, but it's a little bit different from the one we had in class, and I liked ours better. The area in the intertidal zone means that, the low tide covers it with the water. Okay, during low tide, the water moves in, it moves up, okay, toward the top of the intertidal zone, and then it moves back down. So the higher we are, the less frequently we will be underwater. This splash zone is just when there's big waves. Okay, big waves are splashing it with water. Or as we said in the previous video, if there's a big storm with really big waves, then maybe we're going to be covering this area a little bit more with water, but usually it's just a splash. All right, so thinking about that zonation in preparation for your quiz in the next class. All right, have a good day. Oops.